You're not afraid of the dark, are you?
Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing science fiction movies that are 20 years old. Now when I say 20 years old, I'm using mathematics here because one of them is 22 years old and the other one is 18 years old. So it averages out to 20 years old. And both of them were fairly prominent at the time, so it was probably about time somebody did a re-watch of them and kind of see whether they work in a modern context and see whether they still hold up as much as they did when they first came out. So let's get started. Now I've come up with an idea to describe science fiction movies and general movies that are more than a certain age old and are due for re-evaluation. It's a thing I call the attention horizon. Now there are movies that stay on the popular attention a lot longer than other movies. One of the problems that we're going to have with the Avatar sequels is that the attention horizon of Avatar was brief. People loved watching it when it first came out. The CG blew everybody away. It was amazing for about 5 minutes. And then people kind of went away and saw other things. The MCU came along around the same time and people started that as their focus in popular culture, particularly popular movies, and the attention horizon of Avatar dropped right off. There are a few reasons why this kind of thing happens. First off, name 3 characters from Avatar. You can't, for the simple reason that they're not memorable. And even though it looked lovely, it really hasn't kept the popular attention. And there are any number of movies that have long attention horizons. Things like Jaws and Star Wars and Casablanca and Metropolis all have incredibly long attention horizons because they stay in the popular imagination for a prolonged period of time. That isn't to say that the movies that drop off the attention horizon are bad. They're not necessarily bad. They're not necessarily not worth rewatching. It's just that other things have grabbed the attention and they haven't retained it. And movies can regain the attention horizon as well because they become nostalgic. And we look back on them. Some of them get Blu-ray or DVD or 4K releases. And we look back at them. But there are a lot of movies that just drop below that horizon. And we really don't think about them very much. Things like La La Land. People were talking about La La Land for a couple of months, really hot and kind of discussing it a lot, and then nobody talked about it after that. Kind of interesting how that works in the modern kind of churning through popular cultural context. But there are some films that are worth re-evaluating that have dropped just below the attention horizon. And the first one I'm going to talk about is from 2004. It's a little movie called Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow with Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Giovanni Ribisi's in there as well, and Angelina Jolie. Now, this movie is kind of interesting because at the start, the CG is very sketchy. It was the first movie done entirely on blue screen, like the one behind me. Well, not like the one behind me, much better than the one behind me, but it was the first movie that was shot with live actors on a blue screen. And it was challenging because of that. The director and producer and writer, Kerry Conlon, had made this a passion project. The movie was made using all sorts of primitive technologies and primitive software. And the interesting thing is, as you watch this movie and as the movie progresses, the special effects in the backgrounds get better. The start of it in the New York scenes, the backgrounds are blurry, there's soft focus on the actors, there's really some problems with it, but by the time you get to a rocket full of animals shooting off into space, which is how the movie ends, spoiler, the CG is pretty damn good, and I kind of like that. It's almost like you're watching somebody learning how to make a movie while they're making a movie, and it works really well for me. Now, of course, the story of it is that a guy called Joseph Sullivan, aka Sky Captain, played by Jude Law, runs his own private air force called the Flying Legion. His personal aircraft, I'm reading this by the way, is a modified Curtiss P-40. And it's modified quite significantly. There's some really groovy things that happen with this particular aeroplane. Then we get the kind of least valuable player, which is Gwyneth Paltrow as Polly Perkins, a plucky female reporter with a camera. And Gwyneth Paltrow, yeah, I mean, problematic for a bunch of different reasons, but she's kind of okay in it. It's a kind of thankless role in a way. Yeah, she does some things to move the plot along and to bring the bad guy Totenkopf to the attention of Sky Captain. But there's something about her that's kind of slightly off. And maybe it's the difficulty of actors working against a green screen. It's not something everyone can do. And it's not something everyone can do well the first time they do it. Then you've got Angelina Jolie as Frankie Cook, who works for the Royal Air Force on an enormous version of the MCU's helicarriers. And she was on set for 3 days. She's filmed her scenes in 3 days and did a bloody good job of it. And gave us a character we wanted more of. And that's the interesting thing about this kind of movie. Occasionally secondary characters are the ones you really want to see more of, and the main characters are the ones you want to see less of. You also have Giovanni Ribisi playing Dex, the scientist buddy of Sky Captain, and he's kind of okay in it. He does what needs to be done. But the important thing about this movie isn't the characters, it isn't the plot, it's the world it creates. And in fact, it's in the title, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. And it gives us a wonderful diesel punk world, which is beautiful. It owes a lot to a whole bunch of different movies. There's a lot of Fritz Lang in this one, particularly Metropolis, Despione, and also Dr. Mabuse. You got the influence of the Black Hawk comic books. The biggest influence, at least in the beginning scenes, is the Dave Fleischer Superman short cartoons that were filmed in the 1940s. If you go back and watch those ones, and then watch Sky Captain, you can see the influence there. The giant robots that invade New York are all part of that. Though, to be fair, this movie does give us some interesting variations. But it looks right. It would have been nice if they were a little more high-res, but that just wasn't available to them at the time they made this. But they kind of punched above their weight by giving us this diesel punk pre-World War II New York, where giant robots are invading and stealing infrastructure for Totenkopf to use on his secret island base, where there are also dinosaurs. There's so many eye-popping bits and pieces in this. It's a pulp novel brought to life. And it works. I was kind of getting disengaged slightly when the early scenes were filmed with the kind of soft focus and the less than perfect backgrounds. But it drew me in, particularly when they started Sky Captain's plane through the canyons of New York, going up against flying manta ray robots. That kind of got me because they did really well with that, given the technologies they had. It's worth revisiting and seeing just how different the early scenes are from the later scenes. It can be seen as a weakness of the film. You can view it a number of different ways, but for me, it's not a weakness of the film. It's a weakness of the available technologies, and Kerry Conlon did the best with what I think it's a he had at the time, and really delivered a passion project that worked. Jude Law's kind of okay playing Sky Captain, using the kind of Jude Law charm in there as well. And I wanted more of this world, and I'm kind of reluctant to say this. It's a movie that you could probably remake and improve on. Not necessarily with the same actors, I don't think that would work, but I think that maybe a Sky Captain animated series or a Sky Captain short streaming series would work. Because that diesel punk milieu between World War I and 1945 is an interesting time in cinema history, and it's an interesting time in human history. And it's an interesting place to set anachronistic science. As to whether it was a good idea, and again this is a spoiler, to use archival BBC footage of the late Laurence Olivier for the villain, on whether that's a good idea or not, I'll leave it to other people. I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's an interesting use of that archival footage, piecing it together to give us a kind of semi-computerized version of a dead villain, because the villain ultimately is dead, and the robots he created are continuing his vision, which again is a kind of interesting thing to put in the 1930s context. But Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow worked for me on a rewatch. There's the back cover as well. This is a fairly bare bones Blu-ray because it's It was put out right at the start of Blu-ray technologies, where you get it at the start of the disc. You get a whole bunch of ads basically touting the technology of Blu-ray. I think it may have come out when Blu-ray was going up against the other HD format, and they had that war going on, so you had to plug your particular technology. But it's fun. It says medium level violence and mature themes. Not sure what the mature themes are, but it did have medium level violence. But this one you might want to rewatch. I don't know if it's on a streaming service where you are, but I kind of enjoyed watching it on the disc. And again, that arc of the special effects improving while the movie was playing makes it a unique part of cinema. And the fact that Kerry Conlon made a movie using CG backgrounds at a time where people didn't think the technology was there yet is an admirable thing. So that's the first of the two movies. The second one was filmed here in Australia, which is kind of nice, and it has some Australian actors in it. And it's the first of a trilogy. The second one I didn't like, the third one I didn't mind, but the first one is a really interesting science fiction movie about survival. We've had them before in science fiction. You had Enemy Mine, for instance, which is, again, I've got to rewatch. I haven't seen that for a long time, so I'm going to try to find a disc of that and rewatch that one. But this one is from the year 2000. It stars Vin Diesel and Radha Mitchell, and it is pitch black. I kind of like this disc, by the way. It's got a really nice redone cover. It's got a cartoonish back cover as well. And there are a few extras in there as well. So this one came out from Universal about 5 or 6 years ago here in Australia. And I like pitch black because even though the science isn't exactly right, it makes the effort. It tries to do things right. A transport ship is passing through a solar system on its way between A and B. Everybody's in cryogenic stasis. And they pass near a comet, and a whole bunch of particles from the comet pierce the ship and make it crash on a desert planet in that system. One of the crew, played by Radha Mitchell, a person called Fry, lands the ship, and the survivors get out and find that they're on a planet where the sun doesn't set. It's got 3 suns. It orbits as a binary with a larger planet which has rings around it, which is a kind of cool visual. And this mixed group of people, there's a kind of a feet smuggler played by Lewis Fitzgerald, who's kind of fun and gets the best death in the movie. There's an indigenous guy called Zeke who unfortunately gets killed first, and I always hated that trope of the black guy getting killed first, but that happens in this movie. But I do have to acknowledge it before I move on. There's also an imam, a Muslim imam, played by Keith David, who does a really nice job of it. This is one of Keith David's most interesting roles, and he reprises it in one of the sequels as well, which I kind of like, who's escorting a bunch of young Muslim students to New Mecca. Now, I'm not sure what happened to old Mecca, but there's a new Mecca. Whether it's a planet or on a planet or not, I don't know. And there's a young stowaway. And a bounty hunter, played by Cole Hauser, who is bringing a wanted criminal, Richard B. Riddick, to the authorities. Now, Riddick, of course, is the Vin Diesel character, and we get a slow burn with him. We actually hear a bit of a voiceover where we learn a little bit about Riddick's abilities. He's got a very keen sense of smell. He's strong and he's resilient. And when he was in a prison where there were low light levels, he had implants put in his eyes, enabling him to see in the dark using infrared. That requires him, of course, to wear goggles while he's in normal light levels. And this is a problem for Riddick in the first part of the film because there is no darkness on this planet, except once every 22 years when there's an eclipse by the larger planet and all hell breaks loose. So in a way, this movie harks back to not other science fiction movies, but other movies in general. Things like Flight of the Phoenix and Sands of the Kalahari. It's got a bit of the feel of that, where the survivors have to travel from A to B in order to find some place to survive. And the planet is quite challenging. For a start, the oxygen levels are a bit low, so people have to wear little tubes up their nose to give them supplemental oxygen. This is less of a problem for Riddick. He's, as we learned in the second movie, a Furion. He's a special kind of human being, makes him a kind of low-level superhero in a way. But the nice thing about Riddick in the first movie is he's somebody who's been incarcerated for half of his life. He was born, he's basically a dumpster baby who lived through some incredibly rough times, has been to some of the worst prisons in the universe, and is geared 100% towards survival. Now, there is a character arc for Riddick where he learns that there's more to life than survival. And Radha Mitchell's character Fry is the person who educates him in that in a whole bunch of different ways. Up till that point, he is a dangerous, feral human being. And that makes it kind of good. This is Vin Diesel's breakout role in a lot of ways. He did a couple of things before it, including the voice of the Iron Giant, and he was also in Saving Private Ryan. But this is his breakout role, and it works because he's kind of got a little bit of that less is more acting going about him, where he doesn't have to over-emote, but he has to just look kind of deadpan, low-key things that he says. And he makes mistakes. They all make mistakes because they don't know this planet. And Fry is a good leader, even though she made some mistakes as the ship was crashing. She is a very good leader because she admits to her mistakes and modifies her actions. And I like that. I like the fact that she's kind of modelling best practice. And that worked for me really, really well. It's a really nice role. Louis Fitzgerald is good in this one as well. Keith David's good. And Vin Diesel is fantastic. Now, the movie was filmed in and around Coober Pedy in South Australia, which is a desert opal mining town where most of the town is underground because, it's cooler underground. And also that's where you get the opals. So you can stay in an Airbnb in Coober Pedy that's underground. There are hotels and motels under town. Haven't been there, but it's kind of on my low-level bucket list to go to Coober Pedy at some stage. And the landscapes work. And the other thing that makes the landscapes work, apart from the very careful and targeted use of computer-generated imagery, is that as the suns go around this planet, or as this planet goes around the suns, and different suns rise and set, the light changes. There's an intensely bright light because one of the suns is maybe an F-class star, and it's got a lot of kind of high-end ultraviolet and that end of the spectrum radiation, so that the light is very harsh. There's another one where the light's more blue, and there's also a kind of red dwarf star, so that you get a kind of reddish tinge at various times. And the cinematography makes that work. It gives us a real feel for an alien planet in a way that so many other movies don't. And so many movies that are ostensibly set on desert planets don't really give us that kind of intensity of light, and that shifting of light is something you do notice in deserts. And I've been to one or two. Actually two. 3 if you count Dubai. And each of them's got different light. But Pitch Black works because it respects the genre, and it harks back to science fiction novels like the Death World series by Harry Harrison, which is set on alien planets, and any number of 1950s American science fiction pulp novels where a team crash on an alien planet and have to adapt to it. It's a trope that keeps on giving to the genre, and you can frame a number of different types of stories within that broad framework of survival in a deadly place. And this movie respects that. It's like I said, the science isn't perfect. The biology of the alien threat that the people meet, and I haven't talked about that yet, it's a little hard to make alien threats look different from Alien and the Alien movies. But I think that Pitch Black does that, giving us those anchor-headed monsters that fly and sense human beings by sound. That's a kind of nice piece of biology. I don't know how they survived during the 22 years when it's not dark on the planet. But we'll leave that aside. Maybe they've got a subterranean food source. There's some indications that there are subterranean life forms that they may well feed off, and then they go into a mating and feeding frenzy. when it gets dark once every 22 years, you can kind of find a way to sell that as a scientific thing. But Pitch Black works because it's a good, honest action film. In some ways it's a horror film. In some ways it's also a science fiction film. And again, there are some limitations because it was made in 2000. And the fact that you don't always see the aliens very clearly is part of that limitation. And that's okay. If we accept stop motion dinosaurs, we can accept slightly sketchy computer generated things in a movie made around the turn of the century. But rewatching these two movies was a lot of fun. I wanted to respect them and I wanted to give them a fair chance to see whether they're rewatchable. And they both are. I haven't watched the second Riddick movie, Chronicles of Riddick, in a long time. I might just do that and talk about that, though I do think it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. And the third one I kind of like, but in a sense it's kind of sort of a rehash of the first one. But yeah, I don't think we need to have any more Riddick movies, but I kind of like the fact that they were made. They're good on a science fiction survival films with a strong female character, strong characters with various belief systems, which is kind of cool. And it gives us hints at a really interesting larger world. The world building in this is kind of subtle, but I like what it does with it. It gives us a world that gives us a universe where Muslim people still practice their religion. Atheists are acceptable also, and Riddick, who has some really good dialogue about he knows God exists but he hates the bastard. There can be seen to be a little bit of influence of Snake Plissken in Riddick. I think Riddick takes the prize on edge. He's an edgier character. He's more like a real prison tough guy than Snake Plissken ever was. Even though I do like the Snake Plissken movies, even the second one. It works. It's honest science fiction. It's a lot of fun. It's a good adventure film, and the monsters are truly terrifying. What more can you ask for? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema and donating there. Got some more science fiction coming up in the next video, and I'm also releasing the video that I showed to the Patreon supporters a few days ago. So both of those will be out this weekend, which is going to be a lot of fun. 2 videos on the weekend. What more can you ask for? Anyway, in the meantime, look after yourselves. Stay safe. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Reevaluate movies that you watched 20 years ago, because you may well find that you still like them. And I'll catch you next time.